The night wore Christmas Eve like a fine lace wrapper, soft, deceptive, and full of hidden pins. In Lagos, the air did not snow, it sweated. It clung to the curtains, pressed itself into the cushions, and sat boldly in the living room like an uninvited auntie who came just to check on you. Ifeoma moved through it with the quiet grace of a woman who had learned to make peace with the things she could not change. The dining table was her small kingdom tonight. Plates arranged like disciplined soldiers, cutlery shining like it had something to prove, and jollof rice steaming with that confident, peppery fragrance that could make even a stubborn man consider repentance. She tasted the stew, adjusted the salt, and whispered, "This one is correct. The way Nigerian women bless food like it's a child about to write WEC." From the sitting room, the TV murmured Christmas songs. Ifeoma didn't sing along. She hummed under her breath instead, not because she was unhappy, but because humming was safer. Humming didn't ask questions. Connell came in with the kind of heaviness men carry when they've been rehearsing a sentence all day. His car keys hit the console table with a clack that sounded too final for something so small. He loosened his tie slowly, like a man untying a knot in his conscience, and forced a smile that arrived late, like NEPA light after you've already bought fuel. This aroma, he said, trying to sound normal, trying to sound like a husband. Ifeoma turned, wiped her hands, and gave him a calm look that could pass for warmth if you didn't listen closely to the silence behind it. He kissed her forehead, but it was the kind of kiss that felt like paperwork, signed, stamped, and filed away. She noticed his phone screen light up quickly and die again, like it was blinking a warning. She didn't ask. Marriage had taught her that some questions were like slippers left outside. If you step on them wrongly, you'll fall. They sat down. The plates served. The first spoon of jollof hovered near Connell's mouth and stopped there, suspended, uncertain. Ifeoma watched him, not with suspicion, but with the tired patience of someone who had washed the same set of plates for years and knew exactly which one had a crack. Connell's eyes kept darting to his phone, then back to his food, then to Ifeoma's face, as if he expected her expression to change into something convenient for him. The chandelier above them glowed steadily, but Connell kept blinking like it was too bright. He cleared his throat once, twice, and drank water like he was trying to drown the words swimming inside him. Ifeoma chewed slowly and let the taste of pepper settle into her mouth, because at least Pepper was honest. Pepper didn't pretend it wasn't hot. She spoke first, gently. "How was work?" Connell nodded quickly. "Fine." He said it too fast, like he was running away from the conversation. Ifeoma smiled a little, not because she found it funny, but because in Nigeria, sometimes you smile so your spirit won't show what it knows. Outside, a neighbor's generator coughed to life, that familiar Lego soundtrack. Inside, Connell's phone vibrated again. This time it was longer, more insistent. He didn't pick it. He didn't even look at it properly. He simply flipped it face down, as if turning a snake on its back would make it harmless. Ifeoma noticed the gesture and almost laughed, softly, bitterly, because it reminded her of how children hide exam results under their mattress and still sleep on it, as if the paper can't poke them. She reached for the napkin holder, straightened it, then straightened the salt, then straightened the pepper sauce bowl, arranging the table like she could arrange fate. Connell's fingers trembled faintly as he held his cutlery. He tried to cut fish, but the knife slipped, scraping the plate. The sound was sharp and ugly. "Sorry," he muttered. Ifeoma's voice stayed calm. "No problem." But her heart, the stubborn thing, began to beat like a drum announcing a masquerade she didn't invite. In that moment, the dinner stopped feeling like food and started feeling like a stage. And Ifeoma, without meaning to, sat up straighter, as if her spirit had heard the opening line of a play and was preparing for the first act. Connell excused himself to wash his hands, even though he'd barely touched anything except his guilt. He walked into the bathroom with the careful steps of a man who feared the tiles might report him. The mirror caught his face, handsome, polished, successful, yet tonight his eyes looked like they were borrowing courage from somewhere else. He ran the tap and washed slowly, then washed again, then again, like water could rinse off decisions. He leaned closer to the mirror, stared at his own reflection, and practiced a small smile that failed. "It's simple," he whispered to himself. "Just say it and move on." He lifted his phone, saw the message preview, and his thumb hovered over it like a thief, paused at the gate. He swiped quickly, deleted something, then checked to make sure it was gone. Another notification popped up almost immediately, persistent like Legos traffic. He hissed under his breath. Ah, this girl. His voice carried irritation, but beneath it was fear. In his head, everything had been planned. Dinner, announcement, clean break, new life. But plans, like suya on the roadside, can catch sand when the wind changes. In the dining room, Ifeoma arranged plates and pretended she didn't hear the tap running too long. She knew the sound of a man delaying truth. She had heard it before years ago when Connell lost money in a bad business deal and waited days before telling her. Months ago, when he forgot their anniversary and tried to blame the calendar like it personally offended him. Ifeoma wasn't a magician, but she was a Lagos woman, and Lagos women could smell nonsense like smoke. Still, she didn't jump. She didn't accuse. She simply observed, quietly, like someone counting change to confirm she wasn't cheated. She looked around the dining area. Framed wedding photo on the wall, both of them smiling like fresh bread. Decorative flowers on the shelf, plastic but loyal. A small Christmas ornament hanging near the TV, shiny and optimistic. It all looked normal, but normal sometimes is just drama that hasn't started speaking yet. Ifeoma sat again, took a sip of water, and let it cool her throat. The air conditioner hummed steadily, unaware it was cooling a battlefield. Connell returned with wet hands he dried too thoroughly, as if he had time. He sat and attempted small talk. "This rice is nice," he said, forcing cheer. Ifeoma nodded. "I know." That "I know" was not pride, it was finality. Connell laughed awkwardly, hoping for warmth, hoping she would carry the emotional load like she always did. But Ifeoma didn't rush to fill the silence. She let it sit between them, a quiet guest at the table. Connell's phone buzzed again, longer this time. Ifeoma's eyes flicked to it, then away, giving him the dignity of privacy he didn't deserve. Connell swallowed hard. "Ifeoma," he began, then stopped. His throat cleared itself, like it was trying to speak. He tried again. "There's something we need to talk about." Ifeoma placed her spoon down gently. "Okay," she said. That single word was calm, but it carried weight. Connell's heart thumped. He expected tears. He expected drama. He expected pleading. He did not expect okay. He shifted in his chair, feeling like a man who prepared for rain and arrived to find thunder. He stared at her face, searching for cracks. Ifeoma's face gave him none. And the silence, oh, the silence, began to feel like a rope quietly tightening. Connell inhaled deeply, as if the air was courage. He lifted his head with a careful seriousness, the kind people use when they're about to read a will or announce that someone's jollof has no pepper. "I'm leaving you," he said. No shouting. No trembling voice. He spoke like a man reading a prepared statement, like he had practiced the sentence in the car, in the office, in the bathroom mirror, even in the elevator between floors where nobody could interrupt his bravery. For a second, the room remained still, and even the generator outside seemed to pause, like it too wanted to hear Ifeoma's reaction. She stared at him and blinked slowly, once, twice. Her face did not crumble. Her mouth did not quiver. She did not drop her spoon dramatically the way movies like. She did not begin a long speech starting with, "After all I did for you." Ifeoma simply looked at Connell the way you look at a person who says, "I'm traveling tomorrow," without even packing a bag, confused, but not surprised. Then she asked softly, "Is that all?" The question landed on Connell, like a slap wrapped in velvet. He expected her to beg, to cry, to ask why, not "Is that all?" It made him feel briefly foolish, like a man who brought a loudspeaker to a place where everyone was already deaf. Connell's confidence wobbled for half a second. Then he tightened it again like a belt. "Yes," he replied, a little too quickly. "I'm leaving. This marriage. It's not working for me anymore." He gestured vaguely around the room, as if the furniture itself was responsible. "I need peace. I need more. I've outgrown this." Ifeoma nodded, slow and deliberate, like she was listening to a bus conductor announce the wrong destination. Connell continued, warming up now that he wasn't being interrupted by tears. "I've already made arrangements," he added, and the pride in his voice was so loud it almost became embarrassing. "I'll move out soon. I'll sort things out." He said it like he was doing her a favor, like leaving her was a generous act. Ifeoma watched him speak and remembered the first day they met, how he had been shy, gentle, almost humble. This man in front of her wore arrogance like perfume, strong, choking, and unnecessary. The humor in tragedy is that people often confess like they're brave, forgetting that sometimes the person hearing the confession has already moved ahead in their mind. Ifeoma didn't ask who the arrangements were with, yet Connell still felt compelled to impress her with hints. "I've met someone," he said, trying to sound casual, but his eyes betrayed excitement. "Someone who understands me." Ifeoma's lips twitched, not a smile, not quite, but a small expression that said, "So this is what you're doing." Connell misread it as defeat. He leaned forward slightly, as if he was winning. "I know this is hard," he added, performing compassion like a man acting in a church drama. "But it's better we end it now than keep pretending." Ifeoma's voice stayed calm. "Pretending," she repeated softly, letting the words sit. Connell felt a chill despite the warm Lagos night. Something about the way she repeated it made it sound like an accusation, without any shouting. He reached for his glass, drank, and kept talking, trying to fill the silence before it swallowed him. "We can be civil," he said. "We can handle it like adults." Ifeoma finally picked up her spoon again and scooped rice. Steady hands, steady breathing. She chewed slowly, as if the rice deserved respect even if the marriage did not. Connell stared at her, increasingly unsettled. Her calm was not normal calm. It was the calm of someone who had already accepted something privately. It was the calm of the sea, just before it pulls someone under. He tried to find a crack in her voice, something to reassure him that he was still in control. But Ifeoma remained composed, and that composure, quiet, firm, unshaking, began to scare him more than tears ever could. Connell mistook silence for surrender. In Nigeria, some people think if you're not shouting, you're not strong. Connell, unfortunately, was one of those people. So when Ifeoma didn't raise her voice, he began to talk more, longer, louder, and with a confidence that grew like weed in an abandoned compound. "You'll be fine," he said, waving his hand as if she was a small inconvenience he planned to tidy up. "You're a strong woman. You can start over. People do it every day." He spoke like he was giving motivational speech at a seminar where participants paid 30,000 naira and still left hungry. Ifeoma kept eating slowly, politely, like the food was innocent. Connell continued, "I want a new chapter, a fresh start. No stress, no unnecessary drama." He emphasized drama with a little laugh, as if he wasn't the one turning a dinner table into a battlefield. Ifeoma's eyes met his briefly, and in that glance, Connell felt something he couldn't name, like stepping into a dark corridor and hearing your own footsteps behind you. He started painting pictures of his future the way men do when they want to justify wrong. Bright colors, big promises, and convenient amnesia. "I'm going to focus on my happiness," he said. "I've spent too many years sacrificing." Ifeoma almost laughed then, because the audacity had become comedy. Sacrificing? This same man who once asked her to manage the house, while he managed his dreams. This same man who treated her like a support staff in his life, not a partner? But Ifeoma's laughter stayed inside her throat like a small bird trapped in a cage. She swallowed it down with water. Connell took her quietness as agreement. He leaned back, satisfied, and even began to eat, like announcing divorce had improved his appetite. "I'll sort the logistics," he said, chewing. "We'll share things fairly." He said fairly the way politicians say transparency, with confidence and no intention. Ifeoma watched him chew, and realized some people can digest betrayal the same way they digest meat, without choking. Midway, Ifeoma stood up. Connell's eyes followed her quickly, suspicious. He expected tears now. He expected her to rush to the bedroom and collapse. Instead, she walked to the kitchen calmly and returned with a small bowl of salad and extra fish, placing it down like a hostess serving guests. That was what unsettled him. She was behaving like tonight was normal. Cunnell's voice softened. Ifioma, he started again, but the word sounded smaller now. Ifioma didn't answer immediately. She picked up her phone from the counter, glanced at the screen, and her expression didn't change. Then she said gently, "Eat your food." Cunnell's throat tightened. A strange fear began to grow inside him, the kind of fear that doesn't come from threats, but from not understanding the person in front of you. He wanted to ask what she was doing, what she was planning, why she was so composed, but pride kept his mouth closed. And then, as if to punctuate his uncertainty, Ifioma walked toward the bedroom corridor and made a short call, quiet enough not to be dramatic, but clear enough to be heard. Cunnell caught only a fragment, just one sentence that cut through him like cold water. "Yes. You can come now." She ended the call and returned to the table. Cunnell stared at her. "Come," he repeated, trying to sound casual. "Who is coming?" Ifioma took a sip of water and replied with a calmness that was almost poetic. "Someone who understands timing." Cunnell's fork froze midair. In that moment, he realized he had announced his exit at the wrong time, like a man boasting in the market only to discover the person he's mocking owns the stall. The room transformed without anyone moving furniture. That's how tension works. It rearranges atmosphere, not chairs. Cunnell's earlier confidence began to drain slowly, like water leaking from a cracked bucket. He tried to regain control by forcing a laugh. Ifioma, don't start," he said, attempting to frame her calm as drama. "If you want to involve family, I'm not interested in all those meetings. I've made up my mind." Ifioma's eyes stayed on him for a moment, steady and quiet. "Nobody is forcing you," she replied. Cunnell frowned. "So who is coming?" he pressed again. Ifioma shrugged lightly, as if she was discussing a delivery rider. "You'll see." That answer offended him because it didn't beg him to stay. It didn't flatter his ego. It treated him like a person who didn't deserve advance information. He shifted in his seat and glanced at the door, then at his phone, then back at Ifioma. His phone buzzed, another message. He didn't pick it up. It now felt dangerous, like evidence with a ringtone. Cunnell decided to stand, trying to reclaim height, the way men do when words fail them. "Listen," he said, voice firmer. "I'm not doing this back and forth. I'm leaving, and that's final." Ifioma nodded slowly, as if he was telling her something she already knew. "Okay," she said again. The second, "okay," was worse than the first because it sounded like permission. Cunnell's eyes widened slightly. "That's it?" he asked, anger creeping in. "You're not even going to fight for this marriage?" Ifioma's lips curved into the smallest smile, soft, almost pitying. "Fight for what?" she asked gently. "A man who already packed his heart and left it outside?" Cunnell opened his mouth, then closed it. Her words were not loud, but they carried weight like a truck on Third Mainland Bridge. Then the power blinked once, just a brief flicker, and the chandelier steadied again. Cunnell's nerves jumped. Even the house seemed to be reacting to the moment, like the walls themselves had ears. Ifioma remained calm, reached for a candle on the shelf, and lit it with practiced ease, just in case. The candle flame danced gently, casting shadows that made Cunnell's face look older, more uncertain. He swallowed. "Ifioma, what is this?" he asked, but his voice was no longer confident. It was the voice of a man who has entered a room and forgotten why he came. Ifioma didn't answer. She simply sat, hands folded, waiting, patient as a woman in a bank queue who knows she has the right document and everybody else is just making noise. The knock came. Not a polite, timid knock. A firm knock, measured, authoritative. The kind of knock that doesn't ask, it announces. Cunnell jolted, so hard his chair scraped the floor. He stared at the door like it might explode. "Who is that?" he whispered, though nobody could answer him except the fear in his chest. He stood slowly and took 2 cautious steps toward the entrance, then stopped. Something inside him refused to go closer. Ifioma rose calmly, smoothing her dress as if she was welcoming an honored guest. Cunnell's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "I didn't invite anybody." Ifioma glanced at him, her face unreadable, and said the sentence that turned his stomach. "I know." She walked to the door with steady steps, leaving Cunnell behind at the dining table, suddenly feeling like the guest in his own house, suddenly realizing that the story he thought he was directing had changed hands. The knock came again, slower this time, deliberate, like whoever stood outside knew rushing would only cheapen the moment. Connell felt his pulse in his ears, loud and uneven, betraying him the way his phone almost had. He took another step toward the door, then stopped again, suddenly unsure of his own house, suddenly unsure of his own name. The dining room smelled of food gone slightly cold, of candle wax, of decisions made too late. Ifioma reached the door first. Her hand rested on the handle for a brief second, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement, as though she was greeting destiny the way elders greet bad news, with dignity, not fear. Connell swallowed hard. Ifioma, he whispered, trying to sound firm. Whatever this is, don't complicate things. She didn't turn. Life complicates itself, she replied calmly. People only reveal it. She opened the door. The air from outside rushed in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked dust and generator fumes. Standing there was a man Connell recognized instantly, even before his brain could process it fully. His knees weakened. His shoulders stiffened. His mouth opened, but refused to cooperate. Mr. Adewale, chairman of the company Connell had worked for with almost religious devotion, stood tall in a simple but expensive outfit that screamed power without raising its voice. Beside him stood a woman in a dark suit, glasses perched neatly, legal confidence written all over her posture. Behind them, half-shadowed by the corridor light, was another man Connell knew too well from office corridors. Internal audit. Connell's world tilted. "Yes, sir," he stammered, stepping forward instinctively, respect battling panic. "Good evening," Mr. Adewale said calmly, eyes scanning the room like he already owned it. "I hope we are not disturbing dinner." Ifioma stepped aside politely. "Please come in," she said. Her voice was steady, warm even, like a hostess welcoming guests she had carefully chosen. Connell's mind screamed questions. How? Why? When? But his mouth stayed dry. The visitors entered, their presence rearranging the space without touching a thing. Mr. Adewale's gaze finally landed on Connell, sharp but controlled. "Connell," he said slowly, "you look surprised." Connell forced a laugh that sounded like it had been borrowed. "Yes." "I mean, no, sir, I wasn't expecting." He stopped when Mr. Adewale raised a hand gently. "Neither was I," the chairman said, turning briefly to Ifioma. "But your wife insisted tonight was appropriate." Connell's eyes snapped to Ifioma. Wife. The word suddenly felt heavy, dangerous. The candle flickered. The door closed softly behind the visitors. And just like that, Connell understood. This was no longer a private conversation. This was an unveiling. Silence followed them into the room, thick and authoritative. Mr. Adewale did not rush to sit. He stood, observing, absorbing, the way men used to power often do. The lawyer placed her handbag neatly on the side table, her movements precise, unhurried. Internal audit cleared his throat softly, eyes already scanning the dining table, the laptop corner, Connell's phone. Connell felt exposed in a way he had never felt before, not naked, but transparent. He suddenly became aware of how small his earlier declaration sounded now. "I'm leaving you," he had said with confidence. Now he couldn't even sit properly. Ifioma gestured politely toward the chairs. "Please," she said, "you must be tired." Mr. Adewale nodded and took a seat, not at the head of a table, but close enough to remind everyone he didn't need position to command space. Connell finally sat too, his movement stiff. His earlier appetite had vanished completely. His throat felt tight, like he had swallowed a lie sideways. He tried to speak again. "Sir, I really don't understand." Mr. Adewale cut in gently. "You will." The lawyer opened a slim file and placed it on the table, her fingers light but deliberate. "Tonight," she said calmly, "is not about embarrassment. It's about clarity." Connell laughed nervously. "Clarity," he echoed. "Sir, if this is about work, we can discuss it in the office." Mr. Adewale's eyes hardened just slightly. "Some discussions," he replied, "prefer witnesses." The front door opened again. Connell turned sharply, heart leaping into his throat, and then it dropped. Lara stepped in, hesitant, her confidence stripped bare. She looked nothing like the woman in Connell's phone photos. nothing like the laughter-filled voice that once whispered promises. Her eyes were red, her makeup imperfect. When her gaze met Connell's, confusion flashed, then betrayal, then fear. "Connell," she whispered, stunned. Connell stood abruptly, chair scraping loudly. "Laura." His voice cracked despite himself. Mr. Adewale leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "Ah," he said quietly. "Everyone is present now." Ifeoma closed the door gently behind Laura, sealing the room like an envelope around a letter long overdue. Connell's chest tightened painfully. This was no coincidence. This was a reckoning carefully invited. Lara's voice trembled. "You said you were handling it," she whispered to Connell. "You said everything was under control." Connell couldn't answer. His tongue felt useless. He looked from Lara to Mr. Adewale to Ifeoma, realizing too late that the stage had been set long before he spoke his foolish sentence. The dinner table was no longer a place for food. It was a courtroom disguised as a home. And Connell, who once believed he was directing the story, suddenly found himself seated at the center of it, with no script left to read. Mr. Adewale adjusted his seat, finally settling in as though he intended to stay a while. The calm in his demeanor unsettled Connell more than anger ever could. Anger could be argued with, negotiated with, even manipulated. Calm simply observed and waited for truth to confess itself. The internal audit officer placed a slim laptop on the table and opened it slowly, like a magician revealing the trick everyone secretly feared. "Connell," Mr. Adewale began, his voice low but steady. "Earlier today, certain irregularities came to my attention. Numbers that didn't align. Reports that traveled faster than they should have." Connell shook his head immediately, reflexively. "Sir, there must be a mistake." The lawyer looked up. "Mistakes are accidental," she said. "Patterns are intentional." The laptop screen glowed softly, reflecting off Connell's sweating forehead. Figures appeared, familiar figures. Too familiar. His fork slipped from his hand and clattered against the plate, loud and embarrassing. Ifeoma did not react. She sat still, hands folded, watching the unraveling with a calm that bordered on mercy. Mr. Adewale continued. "These documents were shared with a competing firm. Confidential ones. We traced the access." He paused, allowing the silence to stretch. "It led us to you." Connell's heart pounded, so violently he felt dizzy. He glanced at Lara instinctively. She shook her head frantically. "I didn't know it was like this," she whispered. "You told me it was harmless." Mr. Adewale raised an eyebrow slightly. "Harmless leaks still drown companies," he said. Connell tried to stand again, desperation rising. "Sir, please let me explain." Mr. Adewale nodded once. "You will," he said. "But first, let's hear from your wife." The word wife landed heavily again. Ifeoma lifted her head slowly. "I didn't plan revenge," she began softly. "I planned responsibility." Connell turned to her sharply. "Ifeoma," she raised her hand gently. "Let me finish." Her voice did not shake. "I noticed inconsistencies weeks ago. Numbers that changed overnight. Files left open. Conversations that didn't match." She looked directly at Connell now. "You underestimated silence. Silence observes." Mr. Adewale listened closely, his expression shifting from suspicion to something else, respect. The lawyer added quietly, "Mrs. Ifeoma brought this to our attention privately." Connell's knees felt weak. "You reported me," he whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. Ifeoma met his gaze calmly. "I reported information," she corrected. "What it led to is not my doing." The candle flame danced again, reflecting in Connell's wide eyes. For the first time that night, he truly understood the danger of assuming someone's quietness meant ignorance. Some people are quiet because they are counting everything. Lara could no longer contain herself. Tears spilled freely now, staining the front of her dress, her hands shaking as she clutched them together like a child caught between quarreling adults. "Connell, you said you were separated," she cried. "You said your marriage was already over." Her voice cracked, raw with realization. Connell turned to her, panic etched deep across his face. "Lara, please, not now." Mr. Adewale interjected calmly. Actually, now is perfect. Lara looked around the room helplessly, her gaze finally settling on Ifeoma. Shame rushed through her expression. I didn't know, she whispered weakly. Ifeoma nodded slowly. People rarely do, she replied, not unkindly. They are told stories that fit their hunger. The internal audit officer scrolled further. More documents appeared, emails, transfers, timestamps. Lara gasped. You said those were drafts, she said to Cunnell. You said it was safe. Cunnell's voice rose defensively. I was handling it. Mr. Adewale leaned forward slightly. Handling, it would have meant protecting the company, he said. You did the opposite. Lara broke down completely then, sobbing openly. He told me he owned the house, she cried. He told me he was powerful. The lawyer glanced up sharply. The house, she repeated. Ifeoma finally shifted slightly in her seat. Her calm had not cracked, but something in her eyes sharpened. That, she said softly, is another matter entirely. Cunnell's breath hitched. He stared at Ifeoma, dread creeping deeper into his chest. Ifeoma, please, he whispered, abandoning pride now. We can talk. She looked at him steadily. We are talking, she replied. Just not privately anymore. The lawyer closed the file briefly, exchanging a glance with Mr. Adewale. Perhaps, she said, we should address ownership. Lara's sobbing slowed as confusion took over. Ownership of what? She asked weakly. Ifeoma stood slowly this time, her movements graceful, controlled. Of the things he claimed, she said, and the lies he stood on. Cunnell felt sweat trickle down his spine. The dinner he thought would free him had become a stage where every lie queued up for its turn to speak. The lawyer opened a second file, thicker, heavier, final. She slid it across the table, the sound of paper against wood echoing loudly in the quiet room. This, she said, contains financial records linked to the property Cunnell referred to as his. Cunnell shook his head violently. This is unnecessary, he protested. This is personal. Mr. Adewale responded calmly. Personal finances often explain professional behavior. The lawyer turned the file toward Ifeoma. Mrs. Ifeoma? Ifeoma nodded and spoke gently. The house was purchased using my inheritance, she said. Transferred in parts. Quietly. Lara's crying stopped abruptly. Inheritance, she repeated faintly. Cunnell's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The lawyer flipped a page. The funds originated from Mrs. Ifeoma's account, she confirmed. Documentation is clear. Cunnell staggered back slightly, gripping the chair. You never said anything, he whispered to Ifeoma. Desperation replacing arrogance. Ifeoma met his gaze. You never asked, she replied softly. Mr. Adewale exhaled slowly. So, he said, the foundation of everything you promised rests on borrowed ground. Lara let out a broken laugh that turned into another sob. You lied to everyone, she cried. Cunnell dropped back into his chair, heavily. The room felt smaller now, tighter. Internal audit closed the laptop. Effective immediately, he said. Your access is suspended pending further investigation. Cunnell's heart sank completely. Sir, Mr. Adewale raised a hand again. Enough, he said gently but firmly. He turned to Ifeoma. You handled this with restraint, he said. Few would. Ifeoma nodded, her expression composed. I didn't want noise, she replied. I wanted truth. Cunnell stared at her, realization crashing fully now. This woman he underestimated had not shouted, had not fought, had not begged. She had simply waited, gathered, and invited the truth to dinner. The candle burned steadily as the weight of the accusation settled. Cunnell's declaration, I am leaving you, echoed faintly in his mind, stripped now of its power. He had announced his exit, believing himself in control. Instead, he had unknowingly summoned an audience. And the story he thought would end quietly had only just begun. The room no longer belonged to Cunnell. He could feel it in the way the air had shifted, in the way everyone's attention now tilted toward Ifeoma without her demanding it. Power, he realized too late, did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrived quietly, sat down gently, and waited for lies to finish talking. Ifioma remained standing, not because she needed height, but because truth often preferred an upright posture. She looked around the room once, not dramatically, just enough to acknowledge every witness present. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and deliberate, the kind of calm that comes from certainty, not suppression. "I didn't plan this evening as revenge," she said softly. "I planned it as responsibility." Connell flinched. Responsibility had always been her word, not his. He had worn ambition like a badge. She had worn responsibility like skin. She continued, explaining how the discovery had not come from suspicion, but from familiarity. "When you live with someone long enough," she said, "you learn the rhythm of their habits. When that rhythm changes, you notice." She spoke of nights Connell came home distracted, of files left open on shared devices, of figures that shifted slightly but consistently, small enough to escape arrogance, large enough to trouble diligence. As she spoke, the internal audit officer nodded subtly, recognizing the pattern she described. Connell stared at her, stunned. He had always believed her silence meant ignorance. Her trust meant blindness. He never imagined she was watching, learning, verifying, quietly storing facts the way women store emergency money inside old purses, unnoticed, but ready. Ifioma's voice softened further, and somehow that softness cut deeper. "I didn't confront you," she said. "Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted clarity before noise." She described how she verified information privately, how she reached out discreetly, how she refused to act emotionally. "I didn't want drama," she said again. "I wanted accuracy." Connell's chest tightened painfully. Every sentence dismantled the version of himself he had believed in, the clever man, the controlled man, the man ahead of everyone else. In that moment, he realized the truth he feared most. Ifioma had not been behind him all these years. She had been beside him, seeing everything, simply choosing when to speak. And now, with witnesses seated and documents opened, she had chosen her moment. Mr. Adewale leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, listening with a focus that surprised even the lawyer beside him. He had met many spouses of executives, some loud, some decorative, some entitled, but rarely one whose intelligence unfolded this calmly, this methodically. "Continue," he said gently, not as an order, but as permission. Ifioma nodded once. She spoke of the early years of Connell's career, when ambition outpaced opportunity, when presentations were drafted late at night on their dining table, when confidence was rehearsed before mirrors and reflected first in her eyes. "I helped him prepare reports," she said plainly. "Not because I wanted credit, but because we were building something together." Connell squeezed his eyes shut briefly, as if that might erase the memories lining up against him. She described correcting figures, tightening arguments, anticipating questions Connell's supervisors might ask. "I knew the work," she said, looking briefly at the chairman, "because I had seen it grow." Mr. Adewale's expression shifted, not to anger, but to assessment. The internal audit officer glanced up sharply. "You understood the data?" he asked. Ifioma nodded, enough to notice when it stopped making sense. That sentence landed heavily. Connell felt the room tilt further away from him. He had always believed his professional world was separate, protected by complexity. He never considered that the woman he underestimated had been learning quietly all along. The lawyer closed one file and opened another, now with renewed interest. "Mrs. Ifioma," she said, "why didn't you come forward earlier?" Ifioma smiled faintly, not proudly, but knowingly. "Because timing matters," she replied. "And because people reveal more when they believe they are safe." Connell's breath caught. That was it, the truth he could no longer escape. His confidence had been the trap. His certainty had given her space to observe everything. Mr. Adewale nodded slowly. "You understand strategy," he said. Ifioma met his gaze calmly. "I understand people," she replied. Connell stared at the table. The dinner he once thought would free him now cold and untouched, realizing that the woman he was leaving had quietly helped build everything he was about to lose. The lawyer slid her chair back slightly, not to stand, but to create space, space for a truth that needed room to breathe. She opened the thicker file fully this time, spreading its contents across the dining table like a careful autopsy. Paper rustled softly, a sound far louder than shouting. "We'll address the property matter now," she said evenly. Connell's spine stiffened. He had always spoken of the house with careless confidence. My house, my roof, my sweat. The walls had echoed his voice too many times to count. But tonight, those same walls seemed to lean inward, listening. Iphioma remained standing, hands folded loosely in front of her, her posture calm but grounded. She looked at the documents briefly, not because she needed to confirm anything, but because respect for truth demanded acknowledgement. The purchase, the lawyer continued, was completed in installments. She pointed to dates, amounts, signatures. Each transfer originated from Mrs. Iphioma's inheritance account. Connell's head snapped up violently. "That's not," he stopped. The words abandoned him mid-flight. The figures were too clear, too precise to fight with noise. The internal audit officer leaned in slightly, scanning. "These are clean," he said quietly. "No manipulation." Lara let out a small, broken sound, not quite a sob, not quite a laugh. "You said you built everything yourself," she whispered to Connell, disbelief dripping from every syllable. Connell stared at the table, as though it had betrayed him. Iphioma spoke again, her voice gentle but unyielding. "I never asked for ownership to be discussed," she said. "I didn't weaponize it. I trusted." She looked directly at Connell now. Trust doesn't announce itself. It just assumes honesty. Mr. Adewale exhaled slowly, the sound carrying weight. "So the foundation of your confidence," he said to Connell, "was borrowed." Connell felt something collapse inside him. Pride, perhaps, or the illusion that he had been self-made. The house he had used as proof of his success now stood as evidence of his deception. And worse, the woman he thought he was discarding had been the one holding the keys all along. The shift from revelation to consequence was swift and merciless. Internal Audit closed the laptop with a soft click that sounded final, like a coffin lid. "Based on the findings," he said calmly, "your access to company systems is suspended with immediate effect." Connell's ears rang. "Suspended?" he echoed, as though repeating the word might weaken it. Mr. Adewale nodded once. "Pending full investigation," the lawyer added quietly, "and potential prosecution." The word prosecution dropped into the room like a stone into water, rippling outward. Connell stood abruptly, chair scraping harshly against the floor. "Sir, please," he said, voice cracking now, stripped of performance. "This is my career." Mr. Adewale looked at him steadily. "Careers," he replied, "are sustained by integrity." Lara stumbled back a step, shock settling into her bones. "What does this mean?" she whispered. No one answered her. The silence did. Connell's phone buzzed again, once, twice, then stopped. It sounded foolish now, like a toy ringing in a graveyard. Iphioma watched quietly, not with satisfaction, but with clarity. She did not smile. She did not gloat. This was not a victory lap. This was gravity doing its work. Mr. Adewale stood slowly. "You disappointed me," he said to Connell, not angrily, but with finality. "More importantly, you compromised people who trusted you." Connell's shoulders slumped. The man who once filled boardrooms with confidence now struggled to remain upright in his own dining room. As the guests began to gather their things, Connell reached out instinctively, desperation overriding dignity. "Iphioma," he whispered hoarsely. "Please." She looked at him, not coldly, not warmly, but honestly. "This isn't happening because I spoke," she said quietly. "It's happening because you acted." Mr. Adewale paused at the door and turned back briefly. "Mrs. Iphioma," he said, "we should talk soon." She nodded politely. The door opened. Power walked out, and Connell, once certain of his exit, stood alone in the wreckage of his certainty, realizing the fall had already begun long before tonight. The door closed behind the visitors with a softness that mocked the devastation left behind. Silence rushed in immediately, heavy and absolute. Lara was the first to break it. "You lied," she said, her voice shaking violently now. "You lied about everything." Connell turned toward her, panic etched deep into his features. "Lara, please," he begged, abandoning pretense entirely. "You don't understand the pressure." She laughed suddenly, a sharp, broken sound. "Pressure?" she cried. "You told me you were powerful. You told me you owned everything. You told me your wife was nothing." The words landed like slaps. Iphioma did not react outwardly, but something in her eyes hardened, not in anger, but in closure. Lara's tears flowed freely now, messy and uncontrolled. "I defended you," she sobbed. "I fought my friends for you." Connell reached for her arm, but she pulled away sharply. "Don't touch me," she snapped. "I see you now." She turned toward Iphioma suddenly, shame flooding her face. "I didn't know," she whispered again, weaker this time. Iphioma nodded once. "Ignorance doesn't erase harm," she said gently, "but it explains it." Lara covered her face, humiliated. Connell sank back into his chair heavily, his world shrinking rapidly. He turned to Iphioma then, desperation naked. "I made a mistake," he said hoarsely. "I can fix this." Iphioma looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "Mistakes are accidental," she replied. "This was deliberate." Her voice was not cruel, just certain. Lara picked up her bag shakily. "I want nothing to do with this," she said, backing toward the door. She paused once, looking at Connell with a mixture of disgust and sorrow. "You destroy everything you touch," she said softly, then left. Connell sat frozen, alone now with the woman he thought he could discard easily. The candle burned low, wax pooling silently beneath it. Iphioma reached for her phone calmly. "I'll be leaving tonight," she said simply. Connell looked up in shock. "Leaving?" She met his gaze. "Yes," she said, "but not the way you planned." The house felt hollow after Lara left, as though the walls themselves had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Connell sat unmoving, staring at the candle as it burned dangerously low, wax spilling like time he could no longer reclaim. Iphioma moved quietly through the room, gathering her phone, her keys, small things that belonged to her and not to the marriage. She was not rushing. There was no panic in her movements. She had crossed the emotional bridge long before tonight. Her body was simply catching up. Just as she reached the hallway, her phone vibrated softly in her hand. She glanced at the screen, paused, then answered. "Yes," she said calmly. Connell looked up, hope flickering stupidly in his chest. But her voice was not for him. Mr. Adewale's voice came through the phone, steady and unhurried. He apologized briefly for the hour, then spoke plainly. "I wanted to say something earlier," he said. "But tonight was not about opportunities. It was about integrity." Iphioma listened quietly. "You demonstrated restraint, intelligence, and discipline," he continued. "Those qualities are rare." Connell strained to hear, humiliation burning his throat. Iphioma responded respectfully, without excitement. "Thank you, sir." There was a pause. "I'd like you to consider a consultancy role," Mr. Adewale said. "Independent, strategic, well compensated." Connell's chest tightened painfully. The offer landed like a final verdict. The future he had imagined for himself was quietly being handed to the woman he had underestimated. Iphioma thanked him again and ended the call. Connell stood abruptly. "You taking my job too?" he snapped, bitterness replacing desperation. Iphioma turned slowly. "It was never yours to give or lose," she replied calmly. "And I'm not taking anything from you. I'm accepting what aligns with me." Connell stared at her, stunned by the composure that had outlived his arrogance. The candle flickered once, then went out, plunging the dining room into softer shadows. And in that darkness, the balance finally shifted irreversibly. Connell collapsed to his knees without ceremony, pride shattering loudly inside him. The sound of it was almost obscene. "Please," he whispered, voice hoarse and broken. "I can change." He reached out, clutching at the fabric of Iphioma's dress like a drowning man grasping water. "I made a mistake," he said again, louder now, frantic. "I was confused, pressured. I didn't mean for things to go this far." His words poured out clumsily, overlapping, blaming stress, temptation, ambition, everything except himself. He looked up at her, eyes wet and unrecognizable, searching for the woman who used to soften at his weakness. Ifeoma did not pull away immediately. She let him speak. Let him empty himself. Sometimes people needed to hear their own desperation to understand how far they had fallen. When he finally slowed, breath hitching, she gently removed his hands from her dress. Her touch was firm, but not cruel. "You didn't trip into this," she said quietly. "You walked into it repeatedly." Connell shook his head violently. "I love you," he cried. The words sounded foreign now, like a language neither of them spoke anymore. Ifeoma looked down at him, not with anger, but with something heavier, final understanding. "Love doesn't rehearse exits," she continued. "It doesn't plan replacements. It doesn't gamble with loyalty." Her voice never rose. That was what made it devastating. "You didn't come to dinner to confess," she said. "You came to announce." Connell's shoulders slumped. He began to sob openly now, the sound raw and humiliating. But the tears came too late. They arrived after witnesses, after documents, after truth. They arrived when forgiveness no longer lived there. Ifeoma stepped back, giving him space to grieve what he himself had dismantled. Connell remained kneeling, silent now, tears drying uselessly on his face. Ifeoma sat down across from him, not to comfort him, but to speak clearly. "People misunderstand forgiveness," she said softly. "They think it erases consequence." Connell lifted his head slightly, desperate again. "I can fix this," he whispered. "We can rebuild." Ifeoma shook her head slowly. "Rebuilding requires shared truth," she replied. "You've been living two lives." The words hung heavy between them, undeniable. She explained calmly how choices worked, how they accumulated quietly, how each lie strengthened the next, how betrayal rarely arrived suddenly but grew patiently. "You didn't wake up and destroy this marriage," she said. "You practiced." Connell flinched. "Every time you lied easily, every time you minimized me, every time you thought silence meant weakness, you chose." Her voice remained steady, almost instructional. "Tonight is not punishment. It's consequence." Connell's breathing grew shallow. He had no argument left. Every defense collapsed under the weight of truth spoken without emotion. Ifeoma stood again. "I forgive you," she said unexpectedly. Connell's eyes widened. Hope surged briefly, then died. "But forgiveness does not mean access," she continued. "It means I release myself from carrying your guilt." She picked up her bag. "I am leaving because staying would mean betraying myself." Connell watched her, frozen, as comprehension finally settled. Forgiveness was not reconciliation. Love was not endurance. And choice, real choice, came with endings. Ifeoma walked toward the door with measured steps, not hurried, not hesitant. Connell scrambled to his feet. "Where will you go?" he asked desperately. Ifeoma paused at the door. "Somewhere I can breathe," she replied. She opened it. Night air rushed in again, cool and grounding. The city hummed outside, alive and indifferent. Life had not stopped because his world collapsed. Connell followed her to the doorway, but did not cross it. Something in her posture warned him. This was a boundary, not an invitation. She turned back once, her face illuminated by the porch light. "Take care of yourself," she said, not kindly, not cruelly, just truthfully. Then she stepped out. The door closed softly behind her. Connell stood there, stunned, listening to her footsteps fade. The house felt enormous now, too big, too empty. The dining table remained set, food untouched, candles burned out. Everything looked the same. Nothing was. Connell sank into a chair slowly, the weight of consequence finally crushing him fully. His phone buzzed, work emails, missed calls, unanswered futures. He didn't pick it up. For the first time, there was nowhere to run. The silence he once took for granted now roared. And in that silence, he understood what he had lost, not just a wife, but the version of himself he would never recover. Weeks passed. News traveled quietly but efficiently. Connell's suspension became termination. Investigations deepened. Invitations stopped. Calls went unanswered. The world adjusted without him. He moved out eventually, quietly. into a smaller space that echoed with reminders. Each morning, he woke with a dull ache of irreversible choice. There were no dramatic confrontations anymore, just absence. Ifioma, meanwhile, stepped into her new life without fanfare. She worked, learned, grew. People listened when she spoke. Her intelligence was no longer hidden behind someone else's ambition. She carried herself lightly, not because she hadn't suffered, but because she no longer carried what wasn't hers. Peace, she learned, was not loud. It was consistent. And somewhere between regret and memory, Connell finally understood the truth he ignored too long. Some doors don't close to punish you. They close because you already walked out, long before you said the words. Please like and subscribe. Your support means the world to us. Thank you for watching to the end. Don't forget to come back for the next amazing tale yet.